All right. So let me start with the introductions here. So I'm Brian Karras from Pelican Zero. I'll be moderating. Then we have Leo Levit, ONVIF Chairman. Do you want to do a brief intro, or?
You want to start? So I'm Leo Levit. I'm a chairman of ONVIF Steering Committee and Director of System Integration and Access Communications.
And then next to him, Josh.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh Woodhouse, lead analyst and founder of Novaira Insights. We're a small analyst firm focused on physical security industries.
Mike.
Yeah, Mike Dunn with Wachter. We're a national integrator, and I work with business development and strategic innovation departments.
And of course, in security, it's always good to have redundancy, so we have another Josh.
Josh Anderson, I'm with Cherokee Nation Entertainment. I handle our surveillance and security technology for our casino arm. So I guess I'm helping represent the end user on this discussion.
Cool. Yeah, thanks guys. So I think we have a good lineup here, and as we go through, I think it's always best when these sessions are a little bit interactive. So we'll have some Q&A at the end, but by all means, if you guys have questions about any of the subtopics we hit along the way, please raise your hand or speak up. We want to make this as informative and useful for you all as possible. So I think to kick it off, I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, when I hear cloud, it seems like a massively overloaded term. And if you ask 3 people what cloud means in security today, you'll get 4 or 5 different answers. So I kind of want to start with that for the panel and see what you guys think about the definition of cloud. What does it mean to you? And as we start to think about standards in the sense of cloud, where can we go with this? Where do we start defining standards and defining even the word cloud in the first place? Anyone want to jump in?
I can start with that. So I think
Louder.
Louder. Okay, that's true. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Thanks, William. So I think it's a fantastic topic to start the discussion with, and how we really define the cloud as a term. For me, cloud is a technology stack that can be used for different purposes. And when we talk about cloud in connection to the security industry, I think the definition need to be agreed upon because different people mean different things when they talk about cloud in security industry. So as we see it in ONVIF, the cloud is a combination of different, or we could call a cloud system when some of the components in the system are executed in cloud. And what components do we mean that? So one of the components could be cloud storage. Another component could be a compute in cloud, or remote access, or some kind of monitoring system. So if one of those functions or combination of those are executed in a cloud environment, we could see the system as cloud-based. Also, I think what is important, especially in physical security domain, what is important to understand is we will probably never see a 100% cloud deployed system, because as the name physical security suggests, it will be a certain components physically installed and deployed on-prem. So if we take a surveillance system, that's probably a camera that needs to be on-prem in order to collect the data that could be recorded, executed, analyzed elsewhere. So I think that's kind of encapsulating the definition of cloud.
Well, I think that cloud has been one of the most abused terms in the industry. Next to AI, I would say that's probably the next closest one that's been abused. I think we definitely need to work on defining the different versions of the cloud and getting that more standardized. And for me, I agree with Leo, but we have really cloud storage, which is obviously a big issue in how that's handled. We have cloud services, which is managing through the cloud and remote access to your systems through the cloud. That's a huge difference just between those two alone. In saying that you have cloud services or you have cloud compatibility, what does that mean to the customers, to even the integrators? We don't know exactly what they're asking for. When a customer asks me, hey, can you do cloud? My follow-up question is, yes, but what do you mean with cloud? And I think really defining that is going to help us as an industry as a whole too.
I would say Leo's definition was very good on the sort of broad technology on cloud. And for me as a market analyst, if I'm looking at the video surveillance industry, we've got sort of two main distinct cloud video surveillance solutions. This could be something like cloud video management software. So that would be typically just the cloud version of a traditional on-premise VMS. The difference there being that it may include storage as well in the cloud, whereas an on-prem you would obviously be buying hardware, and then that's going to be integrating with third-party cameras typically. And then the other broad distinction would be a cloud-managed solution, so that could be something where you have typically cameras. Most of the data from a storage point of view remains on the camera, and then you have this sort of cloud management layer that allows you to interact with that system. So for me, that's how I see the sort of two broad solution categories that are measurable in the market. And then at the side of that, as you were saying, you've got cloud storage. You could sort of integrate that with almost any existing solution. You've got other cloud services as well that would fit in with that. So that's my take on how we define the cloud in video surveillance.
Yeah, and actually had a follow-up for you, Josh Woodhouse, on that. From an analyst perspective, do you see any one of these areas like dominating over the others? How do you start to break it apart when you want to apply some analysis and market data to this?
I think an analyst role is often putting stuff in boxes, and for me, when I started my career measuring video surveillance industry, it was a transition from analog to network cameras, so those were quite easy to define. They fit in nice boxes, whereas cloud, as this whole discussion is about, is a little bit different. So for us, we look, well, what are the distinct example vendors that might fit in those two definitions? So for me, the two that I always quote would be someone like Wachter would be a cloud managed provider. You're typically paying up front for a camera that has onboard storage, and then there's this cloud management layer that sits on top of that. You have to pay a license to access that. And then on the other side, the cloud VMS is someone like Eagle Eye Networks, where it's they've essentially taken the VMS experience and put that in the cloud, almost completely. Maybe there's a hardware element, but again, we can get onto more complicated discussions of actual architecture as well. But for me, that's like how I would tend to look at it as an analyst. And in terms of like popularity, well, we all know companies like Wachter have grown pretty quickly, sort of in the last sort of 5-6 years particularly. But we're also measuring a transition as well on the VMS side as well, where you're seeing slowing growth, I would say, from the traditional on-prem VMS offerings, and that might be being cannibalized by these cloud solutions too. But the last thing I would say on that though is it's always difficult to compare that, because if you think about my example of you comparing, say, a Milestone to an Eagle Eye in their price, they might include storage. Whereas the Milestone, you're having to do a separate piece of hardware, or you're having to source your storage separately and you'll compute for that. So it's very difficult to compare from that sort of architecture point of view within the solution.
Great, thanks. And so, Josh Anderson, from the end user perspective, and I think in your case with Cherokee Nation, you have a particularly, your video surveillance systems are kind of, I would say, mission critical to your operation. How do you look at cloud, and do any of these various definitions of cloud, do you see them fitting into your organization, or what does this mean to you, and where might you be able to utilize cloud technologies?
Sure. So you're correct. Surveillance in the gaming space obviously is mission critical. We have to have surveillance up and running in order to keep the doors open in most cases. And traditionally, from a regulatory perspective, on-prem has been the push. I think the future of this is from an end user perspective, us understanding what is available and what are the options. So we've mentioned a couple of different manufacturers, and I think those that have jumped out and they offer some version of cloud storage now or cloud management, I think understand the need from an end user perspective. It will be a little bit more difficult for the Milestones and Genetechs of the world to really push this out to larger customers. I do think that there needs to be a clear definition. We're talking about so many different things here. If you were to ask me that question, the answer is the ability to do more, be a little bit more dynamic, and require less at the site. That's kind of how we view it from the end user perspective. We have a ton of data that we're storing on a consistent basis, especially in the gaming space. Understanding what part of that data we can store in the cloud versus what we can store in more of a hybrid model, I think is kind of important from an end user perspective. So yes, it is something that we're actively looking at now. Who knows whenever regulations loosen up, but I think we play a role in helping drive that piece. So I think first understanding what the standard needs to look like, understanding what options are out there, probably the most important for the end user.
Yeah, and I think also for you and for Mike, you know, as end user and integrator, how does the sort of like lack of standards and these proprietary, quasi-proprietary, or sometimes maybe even the inability to tell what two pieces might connect to each other, how is this like impacting, you know, not just your decisions today, but maybe your planning for product life cycles and things like that?
Huge impact. I mean, we have customers that say, okay, I have 1,000 cameras at this one location, similar to what you can go through. We want it all in the cloud. And I have to ask, well, that's impossible to do direct 1,000 cameras unless you have dedicated, you know, unless you're Comcast. I mean, you don't have the internet to do 1,000 cameras direct to the cloud. And so they said, well, I've been told I could do 1,000 cameras, I could do 2,000 cameras. I could put it all in the cloud. And what it is, it's a cloud managed box. It's a hardware piece that's on-prem, that's storing locally, and that has a large RAID array to hold all that. And the VMS is on the cloud and on the internet. And what it is it gives the user the feel that all that data is on the cloud. It's on the internet. When it's not, it's actually on a box. It's either on a box at their station or on a box, somewhere else. And that differentiation, there's no standards on that. They don't know what they're talking about. And sometimes manufacturers can take advantage of that lack of knowledge and the lack of standards and the lack of terms. And they can go around and say, hey, I hit my cloud initiative, everything's on the cloud. I'm storing 2,000 cameras at this one location, it's all in the cloud. And they don't know what they're talking about because of that lack of standards, I found.
I think I would just add your point there that this notion of this box, again, that can mean different things. So is it, is it a cloud bridge where its entire purpose is to make sure that if the connection is interrupted, the data stays there and is not lost and then is trickled up to the cloud, or is that actually the box that is then, accessed from the cloud and the data retains there? So that even within that, it's different things. Yeah.
As Brian said, I asked you, right? And I call it direct cloud,
Sure.
when you're storing it directly to the cloud,
Yeah.
versus I call it a hybrid option if you have a
Yeah.
box or an SD card and is trickling it up.
Yeah.
But there's no terminology for that today.
Well, I think the thing for me is it how scalable is it? Because the notion of cloud is if it can automatically scale, so if you're running out of space on that box and it's automatically adding more in the cloud to that, then that is sort of, some people might say that's a characteristic of true cloud, but that might not be the case if you've just bought a box with so many RAID systems in it and you're locked into that capacity. So,
How much storage do you typically have on site?
So at one location, we'll have, maybe 40 terabytes to a petabyte, depending on the size of the location, exactly what we need to store. And we, this would be archived video that maybe a claim was filed on, or there's a need to keep it for a certain amount of time. And it's interesting that we're having this part of the conversation, because yes, from a standard perspective, if anything, so we can all be on the same page in regards to terminology and we're speaking the same language. A lot of end users aren't in the same position that we're in, where they have to rely on an integrator to understand all of this. They themselves maybe don't have time or don't have the resources or ability to do that. And so they're relying on somebody who's essentially selling for another company. Now, we have a lot of end users, a lot of integrators like Mike that are true to the process and understand the end user perspective and are trying to provide the proper information for them. But I think at the end of the day, standards are important, if anything, so we're all speaking the same language. And we as the end user understand what the options are, what we're getting into. We've done a good job so far, I think, in identifying what security looks like specific to cloud. That's pretty broad too. But I think that's maybe step one, is understanding how secure is it, and what are the different pieces in there and the different types and ways that we can use it that make it more secure. But standardization, I think, is important for anything we do, specifically this, because it is such an important part of the future of our industry.
So kind of just based on where the discussion is going, and maybe a question that's a little bit off the cuff, is cloud the right term? I think we're using cloud because so many other things outside of security, but to me, security technology hasn't always followed general IT technology, and for good reason. You know, the kind of data we generate, the privacy, the integrity, the volume of the data, like this doesn't map to Dropbox and Salesforce and things like that. So I think sometimes we start to adopt terms that become common outside of the industry, which, and of course we don't want to reinvent a bunch of wheels, but should we be calling all these things cloud, or should we start talking about, you know, remote storage standards, remote access standards, and what's your thoughts there? I'd be curious, like from ONVIF's perspective, Leo, is should we be standardizing cloud, or should we be standardizing almost these like hybrid off-premise, on-premise models?
I think it goes back to where the discussion started. What do we mean by the term cloud? And you're absolutely right. Security industry haven't been, and probably shouldn't be, on the front edge of innovation because it's mission critical, and we need to be on the standards and technologies that are proven in time, reliable, and also flexible enough to expand when the need for additional use cases at end customer grow. So I think, again, if we all agree that the cloud technologies provide a certain capabilities for the systems to serve the needs of end user, so we can still talk about cloud. And what we want to standardize is how these technologies are used specifically in security industry. So if we take an example in ONVIF, what we're looking at now is how to make sure that communication between on-prem device and cloud-based solution is secured but open and can be used by different systems. So your solution is more flexible, it's not locked in for all future, and it can be integratable to the much greater scale.
So I've said this plenty of times before to a lot of different folks. Whoever created the term cloud for whatever it is that however it is you want to use it, whoever created the term likely didn't have to justify a move to this to a regulatory body, because it just the term itself is tough to get past, especially for those that don't understand much of technology anyway. So I think looking at it from the perspective of, yes, we have to be able to define it correctly and understand all of the different ways to define it, but then creating standards around definition, terminology, and use, to Leo's point, I think makes the most sense.
I think Brian has a good idea. There should be a new CA committee on naming the cloud, getting names associated with it. So.
Well, we'll need a chairman, so I'll nominate you to head that up. So there's been a few names that kind of like you guys have mentioned, you know, Verkada and Eagle Eye and Genetec that kind of seem to naturally come up in these conversations, and they're all fundamentally closed, you know, proprietary kinds of systems. There's not really, I think right now, something that we're calling cloud that, you know, brings a bunch of different vendors together. Do we think that cloud is likely to sort of be synonymous with that mostly proprietary, or do we think there's an ability to get to, you know, that mix and match best of breed system design?
I'll hop in with this one. I work with a company, Your Six. I think some of us know them, and they're pushing an open mentality. Right now, funny enough though, they're only working with access cameras. Right. The reason being is because the technology on some of the other cameras isn't there yet. This what they call the ACAP, the ability to put on other applications over the cameras. Hanwha's right there though. I mean, iPro's right there. Vivotech's right there. I mean, there's other solutions that are going to be coming down the road. But I think it definitely, I for one, I love pushing open solutions as an integrator. So where Verkada is a great solution, it does lock you into their system, their hardware, their software, and you're locked in for life. Now, many customers will be happy doing that. Hey, it's great software, I like it, I want to be with it, that's great. But if you want that openness and the ability to do it, I think that's where all these standards come in again. So if we could put up some standards that help suggest standards, and ONVIF could put standards in the cloud, I think that would really help move the industry forward to adopting cloud-based storage if we had more standardization into that.
I think it's a great point. So proprietary systems doesn't necessarily mean it's bad systems. In a controlled environment, as proprietary system offered to its vendor, it's much easier to drive innovation because you're in control of everything, right? But the very moment the system built up requires an additional integration to other systems, multi-purpose cameras, to integrate to some business intelligence that specific system doesn't allow, but some other vendor do. This is exactly where we start to have a need for openness and standardization of that openness. Just take a look back when ONVIF been established 15 years ago. That was exactly the problem. We had multiple VMS manufacturers and VRS manufacturers, and that was forced to write specific drivers for every camera manufacturer, for every product. So what ONVIF standard did for those guys is actually opened up the market by unifying the communication layer between those components and the network. And what we have today with the cloud is actually the same situation, it's just different network topology. Some of the components in the surveillance system moving to the different part of the network, we call it cloud, but the communication challenge is pretty much similar. So it's like it's like a spiral, similar type of challenge, new type of topology, and I think this is where ONVIF definitely or other standards definitely have a massive role to play to boost the industry and support the industry in openness.
I think you mentioned the term earlier, direct camera power connection.
Yeah.
I like that because I think that's quite to the point about about where the standard might like to go, because then that's exactly what it is. It's allowing you to point any camera you want that can adopt the standard to your cloud, whatever that cloud may be. You might choose to have a camera with a built-in SSD or an SD card and keep some of the data on the camera. But if that camera is the standard there that allows you to actually point it at whichever bit of the cloud that you want to, or whichever type of cloud solution the vendor is offering, then that's, I think, what we're talking about really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Leo, so I think you made a good point, and I remember when ONVIF was started. I remember those early days of the IP systems, and in that world, I think all the vendors mostly wanted to interoperate. We had a lot of independent camera companies, we had a lot of independent software companies that were obviously intended to be connected together. There's a lot of custom drivers, but I think there really was this like underlying desire to make it easier to interconnect these systems. And then I do feel a little bit like in recent years, there's been a trend towards closed, or some people call it like clopen. Vigilon as an example. They are open. Their cameras and software will work with other things, but you only get the full functionality from the spend on their system if you use their cameras and their software together. So as it relates to cloud, do we think, since you're the only one from a manufacturer here, do we think manufacturers want cloud standards? Like Josh and Mike and Josh Woodhouse, from your analyst perspective, I'd be curious what you kind of feel. Do you feel like they want open standards, but they're doing proprietary because it's the best way there, or do we think that maybe there's a trend to keep things closed and buck a standard in this sense?
So I think it's we need to have a clear distinction between closed systems and end-to-end systems, right? So we made an example of a Vigilon. It's not that closed as others, but it offers complete functionality when it's deployed as end-to-end system. So I think it's quite normal that vendors will drive the idea that the products in these systems are open and can be integrated to other systems, but you get some extra functionality when you purchase the full end-to-end system. It's still open, but it offers you much more functionality, flexibility, coverage of use cases if you go with that. And this is for vendors a way to elevate the value of the total system that they provide. Yes, okay. Now, when it comes to standards, I think one great thing that we forget about standards is that actually helps vendors to focus on actual innovation. Standards are not there to solve all the corner cases and all functionality that end customer might need at some point of time. Standards are there to create a basic and baseline layer of functionality and allow vendors to actually innovate and drive their offering forward. So I think from, now I have to take my ONVIF hat on, practice hat on, but from a vendor point of view, supporting standards is a great opportunity to actually focus on innovation.
I was going to say, I think my observations over the last few years is we've seen, I'd say, more of a trend of many vendors offering a little bit of everything, because certain customers, they want a unified or an end-to-end system, or others want to actively have a best of breed, or maybe they've got a huge install base from a variety of different manufacturers, so they want something that's more open. And I think we used to have a lot of companies who were very focused on that, only open, and then we had a lot of companies that were very almost closed. And what we've seen is a bit more merging and a bit more muddying of the waters. So a lot of those vendors, they still offer a little bit of everything. And maybe if it's more of a closed vendor, they now allow some integrations. And maybe if it's a very open vendor, they go, well, actually, we will sell you NVRs or VMS and camera system, and you can build it and go entirely under our brand if you want. So I'd say that's a big trend that I've noticed in the last few years.
And I think I totally agree with this observation, and I think one important driver of that trend is actually the maturity of the technologies pushing that, and also maturity of the market accepting those technologies. So if we take, for instance, if we talk about another used term like AI, the capacity for cloud compute, analyzing what actually seen in the field of view of the camera is much greater in a lot of cases in the cloud rather than on-prem. But it actually required that you are able to deliver this data from on-prem system to the cloud solution. And even if you have end-to-end system, this requirement is still there, because not likely you have the possibility to deploy analytics that can solve all cases. And there is a lot of smaller companies that drive the innovation within AI-based analytics that live in cloud. And from that perspective, it also puts additional requirement on interconnectivity between on-prem solution and cloud, just because the new ecosystem is built up in cloud.
So this is something that I could probably talk on for a long time, but I won't. The open versus closed argument or debate from an end user's perspective. As far as I'm concerned, if I can't transition to another type of technology and use it with your system or use it with your hardware, then it's closed. That's the way I look at it. And I do think that I'd be hard pressed to ever agree that open isn't a better value for an end user than closed. I think creating competition is only better for the industry as a whole. I do, the hybrid model, the kind of cloak-in model that we see a lot now, I'm okay with, as long as it doesn't create an issue with quality or provide me with the ability to transition or pivot. And from an end user perspective, that's the most difficult thing. Is I think a lot of folks are sold something that seems easy, and likely because it is relatively easy, and they're very happy with it until something else comes out and there's time to make a transition, or they want to make a transition and they can't. And that, unfortunately, there are a lot of uneducated end users specific to the technology that we use, mainly because they have to rely on integrators that maybe they sell for a closed or a proprietary system. So I think Clopen's fine as long as it doesn't limit my ability to pivot or transition to something new. This also goes deeper into the conversation about end user influence in R&D and the direction of technology. I've had plenty of different integrators and even manufacturers come to me and ask, hey, would you come speak to our R&D teams? Because they don't believe us salespeople whenever it comes to making some of these changes. They don't believe this is something that you would want. So would you please come talk to them? Which is honestly shocking to me. It tells me that the people that are creating a lot of this incredible tech are doing so without a lot of influence from the end user, which is tough to understand sometimes. So I think open makes more sense. It gives us the ability to pivot and make transitions. But I'm okay with a Clopen type model as long as it doesn't limit the ability to pivot or make a transition.
Another term, Clopen, you see. I agree. I mean, as an integrator standpoint, I like to pitch open solutions. When I say open, is you can replace any part of the system, including the integrator. So if you don't like the cameras, or there's a new camera that came out, great, I want to go to that, you can go to that without having to forklift out your entire system. Same with the VMS. Hey, maybe it's not doing what it used to do. Maybe, hey, it was great 5 years ago, but they haven't really done any kind of competition updates because they had you locked in. I want to replace that. Okay, well, you shouldn't have to replace all your servers on site. You shouldn't have to toss out all the cameras. Just replace that piece of that. Analytics, same thing. Why should you have to rip out all your cameras because this analytic doesn't work with this camera? So I'll even take it a step further with the cloud, and cloud storage specifically. I hate to say just cloud. The cloud storage. I've had customers that said, wow, this is great, but I heard my cloud storage is on Amazon. Well, it is. Well, as a retailer, they didn't want their stuff on Amazon. They found it as a competitor. They didn't like the idea of even having it on Amazon. So they want that system completely removed because I want it on Google. I want it on Azure. I don't want it on that. And there's no mechanism for them to do that because there's really no standards on it on a lot of this too.
So that was actually, so I was going to go back to something you said earlier, Mike, and then something Leo said, again, in the early days of ONVIF, we had devices that were already kind of interoperating, but with a lot of just like ad hoc standards. And then, Mike mentioned earlier, like your 6, which is an Axis ACAP application. So Axis has the ability for third-party developers to create software that runs on their camera. There's a lot of really cool apps. Hanwha has that as well, iPro, I think there's some others, but when you look at it from a developer perspective, and I've built some little, proof of concept apps, you have to redo a lot of the work. And so from a standards perspective, like are we at the point where we could say, okay, there's enough things going on that we can start picking standards, or do things need to happen, like do we need a camera side application standard before we can get to a cloud standard if we want to talk about like direct to cloud? Because if we don't do that, then the cloud end of it has to support a whole bunch of different very proprietary things. So I'm just kind of curious everyone's perspective, like how far do you think we are from being able to actually draft cloud standards, and what do you see as maybe some of the either main impediments or main opportunities to start checking some of those boxes?
So I think we'll get there as an industry as a whole some point in time. I think if we try to remember the 7 layers ISO system, right?
Or sign model, yeah.
Yeah, the model. I think it requires a lot of work to standardize on application layer. This is what other standardization organizations have been trying to do a while ago. But I think what we need to start somewhere, right? And from ONVIF viewpoint, we're trying to standardize on transportation layer. So how to make sure that the communication part is open, and how do we make sure that in communication we really enable interoperability between different brands. So this is what we would like to focus on at the moment. To your point, Brian, maybe sometime in the future we will get as an industry to the position where even application layer could be standardized. I think today because of massive dependency towards the hardware that this application running on, it's quite difficult to do.
Yeah.
So if we look at different AI or machine learning models, they actually need to be adapted to the hardware they're running on. So it's very difficult at the moment to unify that type of execution. But if we start somewhere, and this somewhere is the communication layer, I think we can achieve quite a lot in opening up the market and then driving the whole industry forward.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see a standardized application level. I mean, I really would. At some level, though, there kind of already is. I mean, a lot of these web programs, they're web-based and they're Java-based, they're HTML5-based, CSS. You know, they have a kind of a standard with the programming levels today. Now, I know there's a difference in loading that application into the API of the actual camera. To that delivery level, I think that should be a wonderful thing to standardize because you can code almost universally today. So having that Docker type application where you can bring it on an Axis camera, on one iPro, whoever, you can bring it all through there. I think that would be a wonderful open step. Now, do manufacturers want to do that and give up their edge? I mean, Axis has spent a lot of time developing that ACAP store in their development. Right? They've been pushing that a while. Hanwha has developed that similar store as well, and they take pride in their little store. So that's going to be, in my opinion, the biggest delay in the standardization is the manufacturers trying to give up their competitive edge to that. But I think as an industry as a whole, it would really propel us forward. I mean, I think everyone here would want to have more applications on the cameras, just like we want more applications on our phones, right? We want more. We don't want to be limited to, is it iOS or Android? We don't want to be limited to, is it an Axis or a Hanwha or whoever?
Yeah, good point. Anyone else?
I would just say that I think starting with the communication layer, I think we talked a lot about the boxes, the cloud bridges, or and I think for me that makes a lot of sense starting there, or that being one of the more sooner standards to come, because you would enable the ability to get rid of a lot of those boxes, a lot of those hardware, and that would then look a little bit more like cloud in other industries. It will never be the same as wider IT, because you're always going to need the sensor, the camera at the edge. But at the moment, when a lot of people are saying they're doing cloud, they're still selling a lot of hardware to do that. So having that communication layer standard means you can get rid of a lot of the hardware, and that I think is a lot of problems. People don't want hardware anymore, so I think that would, for me, make a lot of sense.
Just a matter of time, I guess.
Yeah. So that's I definitely agree with you guys. I think that we see the possibility. So we've been talking about a lot of theoretics and future standards and future things. But today, right now, there's a lot of companies on the show floor selling cloud products and selling them successfully. Some of the names you've mentioned: Eagle Eye, Verkada, Genetec. I mean, they're multi-$100-million companies from a revenue perspective. So these technologies, these systems are being deployed today and utilized, and I would say then arguably there's good use cases for them. So if an application, if a user wants to deploy something today, how do they parse all the data that's coming at them? How do they make these choices? And again, Josh Woodhouse, I would love to get your perspective, like from an analyst. I think you're maybe the most impartial one here on that front.
Yeah, I would say I don't personally validate solutions, or I don't test things, so it's quite hard to say. My analysis is more like a market level, but I think I think it's difficult to sort of recommend particular vendors based on their performance there. But I would say of the examples we mentioned, I'd come back to that. Well, I picked out Eagle Eye and Verkada because from the data I see, they are the largest vendors in terms of turnover in those categories at the moment. But that.
So is that, again, just kind of off the cuff, should our decisions around current things be based on technology and companies that might seem to be indicating that they're leaning open, or should we go with maybe larger vendors that have less probability of pivoting or getting acquired or going out of business? Mike, again, like from the integrated perspective, how do you sort of, if, you know, like you said, when you get a user that says, I want cloud, and you're like, okay, well, define that. Then, like, once they've pointed it in a direction, how do you maybe guide them towards a particular solution?
And by the way, answer your earlier question, how do you sort through? You ask your integrator. Like, that's how you. Seriously, I mean, I know we're a little bit unique with Wachter here, but you got to ask the integrator, any integrator. Oh, great, you're pitching this. Why? Have you tested this? Have you looked at any others? Give me your top 3 that you would recommend, because I mean, myself included, integrator's going to have an agenda on pushing one. Now, I may push something because I just had a really great, successful installation with them before. It was smooth, it was a great price point, it was this. But don't be afraid to ask the integrator on why are you recommending the solution, and don't just say it's the best. Who have you tested it against? What else is out there? I think asking those types of questions, you're going to get a much more honest response than a more biased response. And some integrators, I mean, have their own product lines. I mean, out there too. They have divisions within divisions that they have an incentive financially to sell this. And yeah, it may be a great solution, but it may not be a great solution for you. I hate to say there's no one solution that fits every single vertical market out there. It's just not. I mean, that's why there's so many different VMS companies, so many different camera manufacturers, so many different analytics. So you really have to make sure that the integrator is recommending something for you and not just something for them, because it's easy or they like it. And I think asking those questions really keep that, you know, open and as much honesty as it can be.
A good place to start with that is making sure that your integrator understands your business. So ensuring that they know what your needs are, the reason why these are your needs, how the business operates, what the requirements are from a regulatory perspective, and what you're trying to do to either try to help change maybe some requirements on the regulatory side, or try to adopt new technology within those boundaries. Oftentimes we see integrators and manufacturers that don't fully understand that. Now, there are some very good ones that do, and those are the ones that typically have the most success. But I think it's first making sure that they understand the business and what the expectation is. We are in the process right now from my perspective, looking at what is the future of cloud storage initially looks like. With that will also come management and compute and everything else. But I think we are struggling with understanding just what the model would be. If we have a requirement to be able to access immediately 30 days worth of video or 15 days worth of video, what does that look like? Obviously, likely some type of a hybrid solution. And then trying to identify what do we need to keep for a specific period of time. And you know, if we have to keep video for 3 years because of somebody's ability to file a claim, or if we have a criminal case that is ongoing, you know, that litigation can last years. So how long do you store that? How often do you need to pull it down and review it? There's so many questions that we don't have answers to yet. So I think, you know, we have to start with understanding the business and then working with your integrator to understand what your needs are. And that can often be just a roundtable conversation with your integrator and really dive deep into what does this look like. Very difficult though. I think from an end user perspective though, and where we started was just looking at evidence sharing. So if we're storing video specific to share, then it makes sense we start there. If we know we're going to share evidence with either law enforcement or an attorney or whoever, then we can store it in this location. It's easy for us to share it from there. It's easy for us to track the audit trail and see where it goes. That's a good place for us to start, I think. Anyway.
I think it's a great point, Josh. So nobody wants to really buy WebRTC or any other technology. It's not what people are interested in. People are interested in remote access or remote storage or management or some additional functionalities, but not in technology. So I think another misused term, but I think very important, is understanding use cases. So I think the discussion needs to pivot from discussing with end customers and the integrators what type of technology to use, but rather what we're actually trying to solve. In a lot of cases, the technologies that are based on cloud stack or cloud location might be appropriate. In some cases, it's not. So if we just focus on driving everything to cloud, that's not necessarily the right way to go. We don't know, but I think what's really important for us as industry leaders to drive is the understanding of the actual use cases and customers trying to materialize, and how different technologies can support that in open and interchangeable way.
Great point.
So one last quick question before we kind of maybe open up to some Q&A. So almost everything we've covered right now has been like the bits and bytes of cloud, but I think the other part that hasn't been discussed is the business model side of cloud. That cloud has become synonymous with recurring subscriptions, and we've got hardware vendor, typically distributor, integrator, end user in the go-to-market chain. And again, I'm particularly maybe curious, Josh Anderson and Mike, you guys may be the closest to this, but who deserves to be in that revenue stream flow post-sale, and how do we facilitate this with different distributors, integrators, and Mike, like you said, like the end user should be able to swap out anything, including the integrator. But now we've got these like kind of perpetual cash flow loops, and how do we address the go-to-market standard for cloud?
Again, to answer your question, integrator should be involved.
Of course.
No, listen, nobody likes RMR from a customer standpoint. I haven't run into one customer who's like, yes, I get to pay monthly forever. That's so exciting. That just doesn't happen. The most common question when I pitch a cloud-based VMS is, can I just buy it? Or can I just buy a one-time license fee and I don't have to worry about it ever again? And it's tricky because usually there's contracts with that. So it's a multi-year contract with a lot of these VMS solutions or storage solutions. And so yeah, they are tied to that integrator for a set amount of time. There are companies out there that can transfer licenses, transfer contracts, but then you need the integrator to sign off on that. And they may not always want to. So it's kind of funny because the way that they'll lock you in, they handcuff you in, is by saying, hey, it's a lower price, but it's a 5-year contract. And now if you want to get out of that contract, you have to pay 10 times more. It's like working with any of your internet providers at home. You're locked in. And that is one of the downfalls, I really feel like, because they don't want to be locked in. And it could be a completely open solution, but now you got to write out that contract period until it's over before they can remove it. Now, being that the contract does have an end date, shorter contracts, I can tell you from the integrator side and the manufacturer side, they work harder to make sure that you want to re-up that contract.
Yeah.
They want to keep it in particular. So there is a little bit of work there with that. So it's not all doom and gloom. But be very mindful with those contract periods because they can lock you in to something that's not open.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, especially as an end user, because rarely are we offered the opportunity to speak to what the channel partnership process looks like, and especially the model that is being pushed. You've got to have open communication with your integrator. Again, the channel partnership piece is something that I can speak on for hours, and most of the guys up here with me would probably turn their back on me. I think that there's an excellent, I get the model, don't get me wrong. From an end user perspective, I understand it. I'm not always happy with it, but I understand it. I think being open and honest with your integrator and even having communication and connection with the manufacturer makes sense. Again, it's about understanding what the needs are and understanding not just what the model benefit is for those that are creating it, but also what it is for those at the end that are using the system. And not everything will work. So I think first understanding the use case still makes sense in this conversation. End users have to become more educated on what a lot of this is, and I think integrators play a major role in that. I think it's important that there's open flow of communication across the board. So I probably danced around whatever a version of answer would be, but the reality is it is tough from an end user perspective sometimes understanding some of these models, and I think that speaks to there not being enough influence from an end user perspective or understanding maybe.
Yeah.
And so open communication, I think, again, makes the most sense here.
Awesome, thanks. So before we wrap up, any questions from the audience, any topics we haven't hit?
Yeah, this would be for Joshua Anderson, Cherokee Nation. If you could offload everything to the cloud, including storage, control everything, which I agree, I don't think anybody's really doing that, honestly. What would the benefit to you be? Is it not owning it, not having that upfront capital expenditure, especially with as large of an environment as you have and the storage it would take? Is it not managing it, or do you truly not want it on your premise?
So I think it's probably a blend of all three. I don't know that we necessarily don't want it on our premises. I think it's a part of it's about space for anybody that works in the gaming world. Physical space means quite a bit. It's anytime there's space that's open up, it's basically the sharks start circling and everyone wants a piece of it. So I think that's part of it. The cost obviously is a major piece of it as well. But for me, it's more about the ease of remote access and the ability to pivot, which is not something that we can do very, very easily in our world. So to answer your question, if we could, meaning all regulatory authorities, have agreed this model makes sense and this will work, then I think knowing very little about what that looks like, I think I would have to say yes, it would make sense, if anything, because it allows us to be a little bit more fluid and it allows us to pivot a little bit easier.
Great, thanks. Yeah.
So, according to Genetech, they say that they can do no on-site recording, just camera streaming through. Of course, they can't do H.265 because that takes up too much bandwidth. But that being the case, are camera manufacturers going to be changing the formats that they're using if we're going to go more cloud-based to use up less bandwidth so that will be an opportunity down the road? Because right now, if you have too many and you're streaming, you're just going to kill your local internet connection. You're not going to be able to do that. So are camera manufacturers going to be changing how they're doing that to focus on doing this on the cloud?
Leo, you want to take that one?
I can try to answer that. The standards and the technologies that you mentioned today been developed to facilitate use cases based on on-prem network topology. They are not very cloud friendly because of the bandwidth they're occupying, because of the potential delay they will have through the network configuration, etc., etc. So what we're discussing today in different ONVIF committees and working groups is what other technologies that are more, let's say, cloud friendly, that makes more sense to implement in the devices. And one of those examples is probably WebRTC for the live streaming use case, some other modifications of MPEG versions for the storage use cases. So yes, it's reasonable to expect that we will see some shift in technologies for the video part from manufacturers.
Yeah, I'll just say on that topic, having some background on that, I have a feeling we're going to need to see bandwidth increase, like H.265 smart codecs. If you look at the data that comes out of kind of like the processor or the SoC in a camera, you look at how much comes out of the imager and how much goes down the Ethernet cable. There's a massive amount of compression, and it's lossy compression, right? Like we're throwing data away. So there's that trade-off. We're deploying these systems for evidentiary purposes most of the time, and there's only so much data we can throw away before we don't have a usable image anymore. But like the FCC just recently finally raised the standards for broadband in the US. It used to be that I think it was like 9 megabits upstream was considered broadband. They recently changed that to 25 megabits upstream. So if any of you got a note from your cable company in the last couple of months that they said they were doing you a favor and increasing your broadband speeds because they were like regulatorily forced to, but that also helps, I think, cloud as storage and cloud as remote video streaming, because it's that upstream bandwidth that's been the constraint. So to me, I think there's a little more we might be able to squeeze out on the camera and codec side, but without a much bigger shift on the ISP side, you're probably not going to get beyond that limit of a handful of cameras on premise being able to do cloud streaming, cloud storage.
It's also another component to this equation, and actually, how can the actual sensor be smart in what it's actually reporting to the receiving party? Josh, you probably know that better than anyone else, how big percentage of the actual video recorded will ever be analyzed and viewed. So I think there's a lot of work for the vendors and different analytics manufacturers to do in order to make sure that the content that is transferred from one part of the network to the other is minimized to something that is actually matter, right? So all those recordings with empty room, nothing there, not really of value, but it occupied a lot of bandwidth, and occupied a lot of storage, and occupied a lot of operator time. So I think there is also a lot of things going on in order to make sure that what's recorded is actually what's matter.
That's a great point also, and part of our process now is trying to understand exactly what that looks like. And I would encourage anyone that hasn't done this yet in their business to do that now, because even on-prem, we're trying to identify what makes the most sense in terms of storing, and how can we cut back on exactly what it is we're storing, and what do we need to see and what do we not need to see. So that's certainly something that needs to be a part of the conversation.
Cool. I think we have time for one more question before they kick us out, if anyone. Sure, okay.
Hi, thank you. You've mentioned a lot the regulatory bodies or the regulations. What's the panel's view on their answer to this question that's on the screen? Or how can I put it differently? What's stopping them from embracing this technology further?
So, not to speak directly for gaming commissions, but I will say my guess is, at least I know this to be true in some parts, it is a fear of fully understanding what it means. So I think creating standards, especially around terminology and understanding what it is and what the options are, will help bridge that gap a bit. The other side of it is that gaming regulators are very good at understanding how to protect the industry, but they're not always great at understanding how transitioning part of our model can help do that. So I think it's our job to educate them and help them understand the reason why we want to make this transition, and the reason why it benefits not just our business, but also the gaming authority. And that's not easy sometimes. So I think the more standards that we have in our space, the easier it is for us to make that justification and to have those conversations. A big piece for them is why I mentioned the cloud, the name cloud is tough sometimes, because it gives the feeling that your data is just kind of out there somewhere. And that's how some people see it. So I think creating some kind of standard around terminology and around the process will help drive that forward a little bit.
Great. Unfortunately, I think now we're out of time before we get forcibly removed. So I just wanted to take a minute to say thanks to Leo, Josh, Mike, and Josh, and everyone for attending and the questions. And hopefully we got something out of it. And look forward to seeing you at another one. Cheers.